the death of a Marine officer who had surprised his mom for Thanksgiving and was killed by a drunk illegal alien. Let me just tell you a couple of things. His name was Brian Matthews, and his family said that he was just 21 years old. He had wanted to be in the armed forces from the age of 3. Family members had recalled to the court. He began playing with G.I. Joe and wanted to follow in the footsteps of his father, Bill Matthews, and older brother Kyle Matthews. Brian's father was a Marine who served in Vietnam and is a retired Navy captain. Kyle was a Navy pilot and now flies for the Navy Reserves. His older sister Heather is a Naval Criminal Intelligence Service investigator. Now, the illegal alien that killed him is named Morales Soriano. He had been in the country illegally for years. He had been caught in Howard County and other jurisdictions driving drunk. But in the 4 counts of drunk driving that he had been found guilty of and had never been deported, he never lost his driver's license, and he never served any time in prison. And for killing Jennifer, the girlfriend of the officer, for killing her and killing the officer, he was sentenced only to 10 years in prison and 5 years probation. He was only had to plead to 2 counts of manslaughter because the state pleaded it down. So that despicable piece of flesh is going to be out on the streets one day, and these 2 lovely folks and their families they're dead and their families will never recover from this. We're going to go to Sheriff Jenkins, who is the Frederick County Sheriff of Communities, and he's replaced it with this thing called PEP. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about what you're doing up in Frederick County, because you really are making a difference up there, and as I said, the only sheriff in the state that's actually cooperating with ICE?
Yeah, so we are. We're doing a lot here in Frederick County for about 8 years now. We've had a great working relationship with ICE through the 287G program. We've been very successful in identifying and deporting criminals out of Frederick County and out of the country. And it's actually been a real effective program, and I truly believe that Frederick County is a safer place because of it.
Well, not only Frederick County, Sheriff, but when you pick up one of these criminals and get them out of the country, you protect everybody in the whole state. Those are potential victims that are not going to be victims because you did your job.
Right. All these senseless tragedies, I'm like you. I agree 100%. You place us on the back of this administration, on Barack Obama. He has basically watered down the immigration enforcement to the point where it's almost, in some cases, non-existent. This priority enforcement program is basically, again, a watered-down detainer policy. It's not going to be very effective. Listen, we all know where this is headed. If they had their way, there would be no enforcement.
Yeah, and Ronald Reagan said a country that cannot protect its borders is not a country at all. And we are not protecting our borders. And this senseless killing of this Kate Steinle last weekend, as tragic as it is, Sheriff, and she died in her father's arm. I mean, if that doesn't break your heart, nothing will. But this is every day. This is going on in this country.
This case really has brought everything that we've been, that we've heard about over the years, has brought everything to the forefront. Now this has become a national issue. And I tell you, I think, and I just attended the National Sheriff's Conference in Baltimore for a couple of days, and I sit on 2 of the committees, one being the Immigration and Border Security Committee, and you're going to see a surge by sheriffs across this country to push this administration to enforce the law.
Yeah, and we all know, you were down, people may not know, but part of your job, well, not really part of your job, but you make it part of your job. You come down to Annapolis and you testify on these bills. In fact, you and I testified with Judicial Watch and Delegate McDonough, and we were able to kill that amnesty bill by 1 vote in committee. And that was something called the SAFE Act that wanted to prohibit law enforcement from not only cooperating with ICE, but not even arresting these people.
Yeah. I'll tell you, there's a movement in the Senate. There's a new bill being proposed in the Senate by Senator Sessions. Is it Sessions? Yeah. And it's basically, I forget the name of it, but it's named after 2 customs officers that were killed I believe, out in somewhere in the Southwest, and it's basically pretty much the same type of bill as Congressman Galley's bill 2 years ago, which basically what they want to do is authorize state and local law enforcement to be more of a partner with ICE in the immigration enforcement efforts. And I think, again, if a lot of the sheriffs get behind this, some of the congressmen get behind it, we can push this thing. We can make a difference.
Now, when some of the crazy Democrats were talking about what happened on last weekend, there's I think a certifiable congresswoman, and her name is Zoe Lofgren. She's from California, and this was in May, just 2 months ago. She was absolutely euphoric that there's no secure communities anymore. She said she's so happy the secure communities program has been eliminated, and she wants all the sheriffs to start cooperating with immigrant families and stop acting like Joe Arpaio. And then 2 months later, in her state, this Kate Steinle is murdered by someone who should have never been in the country to begin with. And we all know that this is Barack Obama creating chaos, trying to drop all these illegal alien children. I mean, the state of Maryland picked up 2,500 of them last summer, and it has cost us $56 million just to educate them and house them. What could your sheriff's office do with $56 million extra dollars?
Oh my, that's probably one and one quarter times their annual budget. I mean, we could basically double the size of our force.
And that's to care for, quote, unaccompanied minors who don't meet the legal definition of an unaccompanied minor, and they don't meet a refugee, and they don't meet asylum, but Barack Obama keeps bringing them in, dropping them in nice communities so that he can create this kind of chaos. Now, what?
You know what, Sue? What a lot of Americans don't realize, and they may or may not know, a lot of these unaccompanied children that claim to be innocent children affiliated with criminal cartel gangs and criminal gangs across the country. So they aren't all the innocent children they're portrayed to be.
Well, they're not even children. Some of them are over the age of 21, and they're telling people that they're 13. They have no papers, so what do you say? And they drop them into these high schools, the ramifications, and to say nothing about the communicable diseases that they're bringing into the country and bringing into the classrooms. So let me get your opinion on something. What do you think of what Donald Trump is doing?
I think Donald Trump is right on the mark, honestly. I mean, maybe the way what he said was true, maybe how he said he could have maybe tempered things a little bit more. I think the media took his statements out of context, but I think he's right on the mark.
Well, he is. He's saying that these illegals are coming over here. He's saying Mexico is not sending the best people over here. They're not. They're ethnically cleansing themselves of their undesirables. And they are rapists, and they are murderers, and they are criminals that are coming across that border. If it wasn't so, you wouldn't have 500,000 of them in the federal prisons.
Wow, you're right. So what is it, 13% of the federal prison population are illegal?
37% of the federal prisoner population are illegals, and they make up 5% of the population.
Wow.
So when Donald Trump says, that this is who's coming into the country, he's not wrong. It's case after case after case. The director of that show, A Christmas Story, that you watch every year, he was killed by a drunk illegal alien. There's a sportscaster in Oklahoma, well beloved, killed by an illegal alien. But what is really interesting here, Sheriff, is that this president sent people to Trayvon Martin's funeral, to that thug Michael Brown who was trying to kill a police officer. He sends people to those funerals. He sends out the Justice Department, and not one word to the family of Kate Steinle.
No, isn't that pathetic?
It is pathetic, and he's responsible for her death. Just like he's responsible for the death of those 4 guys in Benghazi. He might as well have shot her himself. He's as responsible as the person who pulled the trigger.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about this congresswoman who's trying to urge sheriffs not to do the job. Well, I can tell you one thing, and I've said this, and I've been criticized not so much here in Frederick County, but from forces outside of Frederick County. But as long as I'm sheriff in Frederick County, we're going to work with ICE. We're going to participate, and we are going to take the criminal aliens, as many as we can, out of Frederick County.
And when you testified last year, you said something, phenomenal, I thought. You said that 25% of those detained through the county's program committed serious felonies, compared with 11% a year ago. So the numbers are going up, aren't they?
They are, and again, we're meeting the detainer policy that's set forth in this administration. So we're doing this by the book, but we're seeing more and more criminal aliens committing serious crimes.
And yet you hear Casa de Maryland and La Raza and the ACLU call you all kinds of names and say that you're just picking these people up because they look like they have a different color skin. And none of that is true. And if anybody ever met you, and I dare say met your deputies, because I've been able to come up there and you've walked me through the 287G program and what goes on in the jail up there, they would know that you could care less about country of origin, you could care less about skin color, you could care less about anything except the legal status and have they committed a crime.
Right. We've had this year in the past, I'd say 7 or 8 months going into last year, we have had a series of serious sexual assault cases where adult criminal aliens in this country illegally have sexually assaulted young girls. The most recent case, a 9-year-old girl impregnated by a criminal alien who should have been deported during a prior arrest in another jurisdiction years ago. So this is what we're dealing with all across this country.
Yeah, well, we had a situation over in Montgomery County where an illegal alien from some African country has been picked up for raping children, and he raped their ages, 5 children. Their ages are 18 months to 11 years. Now, what kind of a sick person rapes an 18-month-old baby? And yet, Obama doesn't want them deported. He wants to keep the families together. He doesn't want us to break up families. So are you going to continue 287G and secure communities? But since what the president did with his executive order last fall, do you still get to continue your program?
Absolutely. 287 is on track. It's very effective. It's going to be continuing. There's no reason to think we're going to lose it. Let me tell you, and you know this, Sue, yourself. You and I have talked. Secure communities was really not that effective, but it was something.
Yeah, it took the fingerprints that usually just went to the FBI and the NCIS, and it said, well, if you get a hit there, we're gonna run it through the ICE database, and then if we get a hit there, then we're gonna put a detainer, and all that detainer says is just to hold them until ICE can figure out, is this somebody with 40 aliases, or is this the guy we're looking for?
Yeah. And I'd like to point out something, too. This country is in the midst of a heroin crisis, an epidemic, which has become a real public safety, public health issue. And I hope Americans realize that 95% of the heroin that's on our streets of America doesn't come from Southeast Asia. It comes from and through Mexico. And it doesn't make it through the borders on its own.
Pat was talking about that, Delegate McDonough was talking about in the first hour, that if we're going to say we have a war on heroin, which the governor has said that we're going to fight this war on heroin, you cannot do it unless you fight this invasion of these illegal aliens.
Right, and we can't do anything until we figure out, and listen, I was down on the border last summer. I do believe it's possible. If we set our mind to it, we could secure that border probably within a year. And then we go about the business of deciding how we're going to enforce the law from there. But we can't do anything until we secure and seal the border. Yeah,
and I don't see anything. Also, too, I believe that the border states are not just Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. I think Maryland's a border state.
Absolutely. And it's like I've said before, I've said this everywhere I go, as long as we do nothing, every county in this country is going to be a border county.
Yeah, and I want people to know that when we went down to Annapolis and stopped that amnesty bill, we had to sit there and listen to illegal aliens come up to the table, testify in Spanish, and then have an interpreter. So we had to listen to their testimony and then listen to the same amount of time with an interpreter, and then have the nerve to say that they're living in the shadows.
Right.
Have the nerve to say that.